Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for May 20th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran, and my lovely co-host Brendan could not be here. However, we have a really great guest joining me for this episode, and I'm very excited to bring on from Pitchfork and also Transient Pink, Hannah Jocelyn. Hannah, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to talk about this movie.
Yes, I'm very excited to get into this conversation with you. Obviously, we're here to talk about I Saw the TV Glow. And for those that haven't seen it yet, Hannah has a really, really awesome review at her blog, Transient Peak.
Yeah, it's a newsletter blog thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Normally it's about like queer music stuff, and
Sure.
this is me branching out into movie reviews, and I'm glad you saw it.
Yeah, I saw it. I read it. I was transfixed by it, and I wanted to get your thoughts here on the show for sure. So I reached out. Hannah was very gracious and indulged me, and here we are. I'm very excited to get into this movie and get your thoughts on it. Before we do quickly, especially because, as you noted, you write mostly about music, but how familiar were you with Jane Schoenbrun, I Saw the TV Glow? Did you see her film from a few years ago? What was your anticipation level for this movie?
So I was intrigued, and I was like, okay, why is Emma Stone producing? Why is a person from Detective Pikachu starring in this movie from this trans filmmaker? It's like, what the hell is this movie?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm still not entirely sure, having seen it twice, but yeah, the trailer came out, and like the soundtrack, because a lot of people, I actually I interviewed Maria BC on Transient Peak.
That's cool.
With their engineer O'Day. And so yeah, it's like a lot of my favorites. And so I actually watched World's Fair. I'd been wanting to see that for a while, but I wasn't sure, because it's like, am I emotionally ready? You know, as a trans person.
Sure.
Oh my God, I'm gonna say as a trans person so many times
That's
in
okay.
advance, because that's what
Absolutely.
this
We love
movie. That's what this movie invites.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
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 But I watched that I watched World's Fair. Actually with an online friend, just keeping with the theme of the movie.
It makes sense. Yes.
Shout out to Emmy.
Yeah.
Who I found because the fourth Matrix movie is one of their favorite movies.
Okay.
And it's like, okay, this person, I need to be friends with this person, even though I met them on Letterboxd. And
Nice.
yeah. You're now a movie buddy. But anyway, with that in mind, I went to a Q&A with Schoenbrun, which is where I got a lot of the information in the review.
Okay. Yeah.
And yeah, like I've been looking forward to this movie for a long time. I think it was this and The People's Joker. It's super cool. And even Love Lies Bleeding, which is not by a trans woman, but it's like a lot of really cool queer movies have been coming out. Like,
Yeah.
like sure, Throwing Bottoms. Like, and this one I was particularly excited about, even though people are like, oh my God, it's going to rip your insides out. And I'm not just saying that because of one of the scenes of the movie.
Yeah. Pun intended, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh my God, it's going to make you vomit blue stuff.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Somebody who hasn't seen the movie and is listening to this is like, what the fuck is she on about?
Yeah. That's okay. Yeah. No, that's very exciting. That's great to hear. I have been looking forward to this primarily because of the a lot of the word of mouth in the reviews. Unfortunately, I missed World's Fair when it first came out. It just was a timing issue. I recently caught up with it though, leading into I saw the TV Glow and was utterly blown away by it. I thought it was really great, especially for a small movie like it is. And you get someone like A24 backing this, an intriguing cast, and then the reviews drop whenever this premiered. Was it Sundance earlier in the year? I can't really recall.
Yeah, I think it was Sundance.
Was it Sundance? Yeah, and just absolute raves about it, and immediately shot up to, my most anticipated list of the year, and especially of the summer. So yeah, I was itching to see this movie. So with that laid out, let's go ahead and jump into it because I am really excited to dive into this. It is written and directed by Jane Schoenbrun, and it stars Justice Smith, Ian Foreman as a younger version of the same character, as well as Bridget Lundy Payne, Helena Howard, who I also adore generally. Was happy to see her in a movie once again. Fred Durst is in this movie, which is wild. Daniel Deadweiler, who I adore, Lindsay Jordan, and a few others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with I Saw the TV Glow, it is about two teenagers who bond over their love of a supernatural TV show, but it is mysteriously canceled. Okay, with that laid out there, I'll toss it to you first. Hannah, what did you think about I Saw the TV Glow?
I loved it. I guess I was talking with another friend who's like way more experienced with talking about movies than I am. And like you said, it was pandering, but I'm like, it was pandering to me specifically. It's like, like this movie about like, and this is something I mentioned in the review, this movie that kind of like takes these kinds of big emotions seriously, but like not so seriously that it kind of gets, sucked in. Not like, it's not like I'm the deepest movie in the world. It is just like, yeah, it's very empathetic. And seeing that, and also just seeing like trans experiences like that aren't often depicted, because it's always like the kind of discovery, the transition, and oh my god, I'm going to start, I'm going to start hormones and my life is going to change and I have to come out to family. Like,
yeah,
there's all these tropes. And then this is about the journey there.
Yeah.
Like this, not to give spoilers immediately, but like this ends where most trans movies start.
Sure. Yeah.
And seeing these things, like there's a lot of trans people I know that had that older kid that kind of understood them, but didn't. It's like you don't even know why you have this connection with this other person. Maybe you're both queer, maybe it's some other thing, but like somebody takes you under your wing. I joke that it's like, it's very Perks of Being a Wallflower, but like for people who like can't relate to that movie. And I think so. I like, as like intense as it gets and as dark as it gets, there's actually a lot that I think is like, it's a very like warm and gentle movie, even though it might not seem like those things.
Yeah, I think that's understandable. And that's really great to hear as well. I'm glad that you loved it. I did as well. I think this might be the best film of the year so far that I've seen. On one hand, it is exquisitely crafted. The use of neon hues and smoke renders the film visually mesmerizing. There are a few long takes here that are entrancing. There's one in particular as Maddie gives this passionate monologue near the end that took my breath away. The framing and composition is nothing short of sublime. Every shot is so thoughtfully designed to heighten or further bring clarity to the emotions of these characters. It's really, really fantastic. The special effects work is fantastic as well. At times, the film is very Lynchian. I know that that word has been thrown out there a lot. It's very true, and I love the ambition that imbues so much of the imagery here. It is incessantly striking to look at, but perhaps what I admired most is how those redolent images complement the film's tone and thematic core, because this film is deeply poignant and stirring in its allegories. I was viscerally moved by the storytelling here and its meditation on the role art plays as both a tool for self-discovery, but also a prison that can leave you trapped. Even though I'm not trans and I can't relate directly with that element of the film, the loneliness and disconnect that Owen and Maddie exemplify is still extremely palpable, partially because of the performances, yes, but most prominently due to Schoenbrun's tonal control and their deep connection to this material, which I certainly want to talk more about as we go here. I also think the reason I responded to this film as much as I did is because I'm a parent, and looking at this through the lens of Brenda, Owen's mother here, kind of obliterated me. She doesn't have a large role, but there's a line from her early on when she looks at Owen tenderly, noticing his disconnect, and she says, "I just want to make sure you're on the right path." There's something about Daniel Deadweiler's performance and how she delivers that line, and also just thinking about how, as a parent, I want to help guide my sons on whatever path they choose, that putting myself in her shoes and how I would be there for Owen, I don't know. It kind of gobsmacked me. I found a way into the film through her eyes, and it always lingers throughout a lot of this film. Like the tone of this film and its ambition, its filmmaking ambition, is just unique, certainly one of a kind. And I found the film to be quite special as a result. Yeah, I'm with you. I loved it.
Yeah, it's so interesting what you said about like viewing it through Brenda's perspective. That reminds me of, I think, in your like Love Lies Bleeding episode, where you talk about how it's a different movie if you view it from like Jackie's perspective versus Blue's perspective.
Yeah.
And I like didn't even think about that, but I think it's because I was so kind of locked in to Owen's perspective. I don't know why. Yeah. I mean, even that, it's like, you know, I'm not like I'm not black. It's interesting that Schoenbrun and Justice Smith like bonded over like the kind of feeling out of place where Justice Smith like, they, where it's kind of a similar thing of like feeling marginalized and misunderstood and just wanting somebody to understand you, or maybe a TV show to understand you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is one, like, I was noticing how like kind of dense the film is with like I feel like there's obviously a lot of like motifs or whatever. Like the scale of it, I recently saw People's Joker, which I like that movie a lot, but it's also like it kind of doesn't take itself too seriously. Sure. And TV Glow has its moments of like kind of levity. Like the scene in the drive-thru cracked me up because it's so incongruous with the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like it's clear Jane Schoenbrun wants to make, like, their Twitter handle is Sapphic Spielberg. Like they want to be at that filmmaking level.
Yeah.
I've joked that if Sammy Fableman's Egg Cracked, this is the movie that they would make. But
I mean, it's interesting that you say that, because I mean, obviously they're different filmmakers. However, a movie that I think is comparable between the two is Close Encounters of the Third Kind, because this is a movie that is personal to Jane Schoenbrun. Close Encounters is certainly that with Spielberg. That was a movie about his parents' divorce, but it's channeled through this family and, you know, a character getting consumed with this supernatural element, right? Which is very similar to what we see here in I Saw the TV Glow. and the characters become morphed and transformed by these supernatural elements. And like this film, like saw the TV Glow, Close Encounters is equally ambitious in its filmmaking, and it gets a little weird at times, especially given, you know, Spielberg's reputation broadly speaking. So I didn't draw those comparisons, but now that you articulate it that way, I can absolutely see where those inspirations might be coming from.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's embarrassing thing is I haven't seen Close Encounters, which I need to.
It's great. It's my favorite Spielberg.
That's complete. But I have seen Fablemans and like 3 times. I actually consider it one of my favorite movies.
Yeah, Fablemans rocks as well.
It's just
great.
No, and there's a lot in common with like the kind of the same kind of tone of like we're going to have these intense emotions, but we're also going to look at this with empathy from as many sides as possible, which is why you were able to connect with Brenda in this. And like,
yeah.
I think,
No, I was just going to say, like, I think that's what I was so immensely drawn to here is that level of empathy and the texture that is offered to these characters, especially from a tonal perspective. I mean, this is a film that lingers in its pathos, and how the film draws horror out of that, I think, is really, really quite mesmerizing. And to me, that's why the allegories here, I think, are sublime. I know there's been some polarizing discourse around it, which I find oddly, or it's just weird. It's straight up weird.
I want to mention, like, because that's something that I was wondering and something I was like planning on asking you before you like opened with it.
Sure.
Just like stuff like how much it connects on a level, or at least Owen's story connects if you're not trans. Because I think there is a really interesting story there about like about like whether nostalgia can consume you and kind of choosing to, or not even choosing, but like being forced to live in stasis forever. There's like a lot of ways that you can read it. Aside from the transness, it's just that like transition is the thing that the film is very explicitly about.
And the film, I think, is pretty crystal clear on that. Again, that's why the discourse is so bizarre to me. It's not hiding that. I mean, people have pointed out that shot at the beginning of the film with the
parachute.
The parachute. Thank you.
I knew. The parachute with like the pink and blue colors, and like the credits have the pink and blue colors. But one of the funnier things, in the Q&A I went to, Schoenbrun actually said like they were doing an interview, and the interviewer was like, didn't know that Owen was like trans. And just like, I knew you were trans. I just thought Owen was a very disturbed young man. People are really dense.
I guess so.
Like, I thought that I saw the TV Glow would be more like controversial. It would like, there would be boycotts of like, don't play this in Florida or something.
Yeah.
But it's insane how I'm like, this movie is dense. Some people are denser.
It's astounding to me. I feel like those undertones are cogent, but again, they're drowning in this deep pathos that I found quite moving here. And to answer your question, I think what's really brilliant about this film, I think Jane Schoenbrun gets to have their cake and eat it too, because I've always been fascinated by the way in which art helps inform how we see the world, how it shapes us or helps articulate feelings that we can't otherwise put into words. The art we deeply love the most, sometimes in a literal life-changing way, it can become a significant part of who you are. And in this film, we do see how Owen and Maddie are transformed or defined in some way by their favorite TV show. something that might initially be comforting as they find their identities reflected back at them. But as the years pass, nostalgia begins to filter out the truth of what they experienced. And that idea is truly terrifying. It's why I'm a little nervous to revisit films from my childhood that I love so much, because I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to have an Owen kind of reaction. Now, obviously, that's more of a lighthearted version of that. What Owen experiences here is much deeper to his core. And the way the pink opaque, which is the TV show they love in this film, the way that is recontextualized in the final act for Owen is so heartbreaking. But I do love that duality of nostalgia and memory, and how it can be a double-edged sword of power and transformation, but also a broken cipher with the ability to rip your heart out. And I think
Literally.
Exactly. I chose those words carefully. And I think Schoenbrun gets to have their cake and eat it too, because yes, that works for Owen in this film. And it works for his journey as a trans person who struggles to accept that identity. And that on its own terms in a vacuum, I find lavishing here. But again, to answer your question, even though I'm not trans, I found that moving, but also kind of relatable in the sense that while my identity as it relates to art might not be as a trans person, but other aspects of my life, like a film, I don't know if you've seen the film Midnight Special, the Jeff Nichols film from 2016. That's one I've talked about a lot here on the show over the years, because it's a movie about parental sacrifice and the lengths that you have to go to sometimes in order for your children to be who they are. In a lot of ways, even though that film isn't through a queer lens, is somewhat relatable to this film in the sense that as a parent, you have to let your child be who they are. And if they are a trans person, you have to let them, or not even let them, but actively help them get there, which is ultimately what Midnight Special is about. So that's a film that has literally transformed my life. And I can find myself, or I can relate with Owen in that regard. Like the way I see art on a deeply personal level that has changed my life. Our journeys might be different, but fundamentally that structure is the same, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that I say in my review of like,
of
like it kind of finds the universal things before it ultimately zeroes in on like,
yes, exactly.
It's like, this is actually gender dysphoria. One of the funnier things I saw in response was someone saying that a lot of cis people that have seen it are like, it made me feel like something was like deeply wrong, but I don't know what it was. And it's like, congratulations, cis person, you have just experienced what gender dysphoria is like. I'm like, it's kind of like, I was thinking in Oppenheimer last year, there's the victory speech scene where it's like how Nolan's fan base is very much like, it's like white fanboys that want to see destruction. And then like when Abby hallucinates that happening, it's not to people that want to, oh, like, why are there no Japanese people in the film? It's people who, it's like the people in the crowd. It's the white people in the crowd specifically. And it's kind of like this brute force empathy of like, is this what you want to see? And so I'm using that comparison because brute force empathy is how I would describe TV Glow of like, this movie will make you feel dysphoria even if you don't know what it feels like.
Yeah.
This movie will unsettle you.
Exactly what it wants to achieve, for sure. And I think as you articulate there, like that the brute force empathy is perhaps why I found myself so moved despite not having that experience, because the horror that is rendered here, and credit to the performances, Justice Smith gives
Hell
a
yeah.
soul-crushing performance. It is terrific.
It's just, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but like, I mentioned Detective Pikachu and like Dungeons and Dragons. Where the hell did this come from?
It's a great point.
Like, I know
Seriously.
how like he got the part, but it's like, what even? Like, Jane Schoenbrun is like seeing him like mugging for the camera with like Ryan Reynolds Pikachu, and it's just like, that's who I want.
It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, it is really funny in that context. You're right. But man, he incredible.
Yeah. I think
in
he's
this film.
miscast in both those movies, and he's perfectly cast here. I really like his like kind of awkward mannerisms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's incredible how he's able to render that deep loneliness and isolation that the character is experiencing, and you couple that with the Lynchian filmmaking you get here at times, the shots of the ice cream truck simply lingering there or the TV on fire. There's a lot of great imagery in this film that renders this visceral horror. Sometimes it's in action. I don't want to give away too much context here because it's a spoiler, but there's a moment at the end of this film, perhaps the most Lynchian element of it, that involves Owen in a TV screen. His father gets involved. And there's something about the horror of that moment coupled with the performance by Smith and everything that had kind of led up to that moment that you sense this desperation in the character and this feeling of needing to escape. And he can't. He just can't escape. He can't find any sort of solution. And again, like even not having that experience, I do think the film does a great job of articulating what that experience is like for a lot of people. And I don't know, maybe it just comes down to your personal level of empathy that you have. I don't know. All I know is I was deeply moved by it. I found it striking. I think some of it does circle back to Brenda and looking at it through her lens, as I noted at the beginning of the film, because, and this might be a mild spoiler here, but after the first couple of scenes, she dissolves from the film and we don't really see her. I guess I'll leave it vaguely there. And I do wonder what Owen's life could have been like if fate had drawn something else out for him and for Brenda. And I think looking at it from that prism, that certainly adds to the empathy for me, for sure. Either way, though, like that horror and the idea of someone experiencing that level of existentialism, it's just devastating. It's so heartbreaking to watch. And I think the film earns every bit of that emotion.
Yeah, I think I want to add that, like it's impossible to convey. Like that's the kind of true achievement of this movie. Of like, it's impossible to kind of convey your internal experience unless, of course, you have $10 million that A24 gives you, and it's like, go crazy. Also, just add your entire Spotify on repeat playlist. Like it is so, and that's something where even if there is that parent that can be empathetic as possible, like they might. It's hard to understand, especially if like the child, and this is kind of revealing of my kind of own experiences with like, if the child is maybe like kind of awkward and like feels seen, like gets weirdly obsessed with this TV show or weirdly obsessed with this person, and it's like, is this like another thing you're weirdly obsessed with, like, you know, gender? And it's like, no, this is what all those other things were like me trying to find in myself, and that's like same for Owen. So. And I do want to talk about. Can we talk about Maddie for a second? Because
for sure,
she's fascinating.
Yes,
I think.
is.
I mean, obviously, there's the 7-minute monologue.
Yes,
which is insane because it's like
incredible moment.
It kind of kept me on my toes the whole time, but it's like so much of it is an allegory. It's like is this about dysphoria? Is this like kind of like, or is this somebody who is like legitimately going through psychosis? Like,
Yeah.
and it's like yes, and also yes, but that doesn't mean that Owen is necessarily psychotic. But and it also doesn't necessarily mean that the other that like the kind of universe of the Pinko Pig isn't actually real or is actually like there's just so much going on in that monologue. I do one of my like kind of issues with like I wish there was like a little bit more visually interesting during that scene, even though like I mean Bridget Lundy Payne is like so captivating.
Yeah.
Like even when they're playing like a teenager to when they're delivering that monologue, they're like, it's not a huge complaint, but it just like, you know, no insert shot of like them, insert spoiler here, or like, yeah, it's hard to talk about this movie because not much happens in it, but also a lot happens.
Yeah, it is. No, I think that is an interesting perspective. I do wonder if the film did something more visually, if it would have complemented the monologue or perhaps even distracted from it.
That's true.
And perhaps that's why Schoenbrun decided to simply let Lundy Payne have the moment there, because the character is full of angst. She equally has this loneliness and desperation. In fact, one of the best lines of the film outside of that monologue there near the end, and this takes place somewhat early on. I believe it's actually that first encounter with Maddie and Owen when Owen comes over to watch the Pinko Pig for the first time at her house. And afterwards, as Owen is getting ready for bed there, you get this shot of her on the stairs. So she's somewhat hidden from Owen, but she simply says, sometimes the Pinko Pig feels more real than real life.
Oh, that is so. Wait, sorry. Do you mind if I like expand on that a bit? Because just before that, she says like, because he's like, "Where will you be sleeping?" And she's like, "In my bed, you creep." and and that hurt because it's like, I mean, that's also like my kind of experience being seen as like a teenage boy of like, no, that's not what I, you know, that's of like you kind of like forgetting you're not seen as like, you know, just like one of the girls or something. And that was such a powerful moment to me of like the fact that she is going to go, she goes up, she seems like she's going upstairs and then she's behind the stairs. Yeah. Because she knows that, like, not that closeted or just trans people in general can't be creeps, but she knows that he isn't. Yeah. And, or at least she knows that that wasn't his intention. Sure. It's the same thing with the tapes of like, I love that so much. Like that's really the kind of like, when I say that the film is kind of warm and gentle, like a lot of that is in that early part of Maddie and Owen's friendship before, No, it's fantastic. And while there's certainly, I guess, like an emotional resonance there with Maddie, and again, how art has taken this stronghold on her life as it's seemingly the only thing she finds her identity in. But there is a meta component to it as well, because Owen and Maddie begin to parallel everything we see between Isabel and Tara on the Pinko Pig as well. And I do love how that plays out. So after we get that opening exchange there, when they first watch the TV show together, a lot of their life in high school is separate, as we see with Isabel and Tara. At least that's part of the mythology of the Pinko Pig, right? I didn't even catch that. Yeah, and so when they're at high school, they're essentially ghosts with each other. She leaves the tapes and
the Red Room. He picks them up. They somewhat live their lives separately, but they do have this deep connection. They don't have I forget the phrasing.
The psychic
connection, but they essentially do live separately, similar to Isabel and Tara, until we get that moment there on the bleachers, which is another striking moment in this film. So it is interesting to see how they do begin to parallel each other. And that moment I wanted to ask how you felt about it as well, because again, what is articulated there, the disparity is, I of course haven't had that exact experience, but there's something about the soul crushing performance of Smith here that just blew me away, because there's this exchange, and I will give this away because I think it's important.
It's in the trailer.
It's in the trailer as well.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Yeah. There's a moment where Maddie asks him, "Do you like girls?" And his initial response is, "I don't know." So then she asks him if he likes boys. And his response is really great, where he just says, "I think I like TV shows." And then he goes on to say, "When I think about that stuff, I feel like someone took a shovel and dug my insides. I know there's nothing there, but I'm still too nervous to open myself up to check," which is just a heartbreaking line. And even though I think I like TV shows is a little bit of levity to kind of throw you off guard, it just comes with a sledgehammer there in the back half of that sentence. And it speaks to that loneliness in the character and simply how lost he is, but also how deeply connected he is to the pink opaque simultaneously.
Yeah, no. So there's a lot I could say about this scene. Because, I mean, like, I also came up, like, I grew up on Tumblr, which is people who completely tie their identities to stuff like that, like, and kind of vicariously figuring out their identity. Like, I can't believe I'm going here, but earlier this year, I wrote an essay. Stay with me here. Earlier this year, I wrote an essay about Taylor Swift and all the people who thought that she was gay, and she's not, but all the people who, like, kind of found their identities through that. And I feel like it's the same thing of, like, people, it's almost like an escape, so you don't have to actually face, like, oh shit, I actually like girls, or shit, I am a girl, or oh shit, I'm not, or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting how art, and I wasn't aware of that whole Taylor Swift thing, but that is
You don't need to be
fascinating. But
oh my God, I could go all day.
no, that makes a lot of sense. Like, that's interesting though to hear that, because I've certainly had, again, the route might have been different, but a similar foundation in the sense that I've, like, art has, or maybe I've manipulated art because of my interpretation or my experience with it, even though that might not have been the exact intent of it. And I can absolutely understand what you're saying there, as far as how Owen in this case takes this TV show and utilizes it and same thing with Maddie as well. And it's interesting to see that polarity between the two of them and how they use that TV show, despite ultimately going in different directions with it, but how it helps them see their identities.
And for the other half of that quote, the hollowed out inside, I like that it's kind of, it is a little bit of like an awkward line, but it's an awkward thing to say out loud, to like kind of like nonchalantly say something so intense of like being like, when I think about sexuality, there's just a void, which it's funny because the high school is literally called Void High. I didn't catch that on first viewing. But yeah, it's just another reflection of like how hard it is to articulate what you're actually going through and what you're actually feeling, which is funny because like Maddie is just very much like, you know, I like girls, you know, that like just very confident and is, for better or worse, very confident in what she says later in the movie during that monologue.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I do love how the film constantly shows us that contrast, and it comes through in another great moment too, where, and I'm trying to remember the timeline here. I believe this is after that bleachers moment where, to your point, Maddie is showing that confidence, and she is more robust of a character. She has this this kind of outgoing personality where Owen is, stoic through a lot of the film. But there's also this incredible subtle moment that exhibits that disparity as well, because they're watching the TV show and something significant is apparently happening on the screen, and the camera is from the side, so we simply see the sides of their faces, although Owen is slightly turning toward Maddie in the moment, and you just see Maddie unraveling, just completely consumed by the art and what it is saying about her in some sort of way, or how she's seeing herself in the show. And Owen is emotionless in the moment. Like,
Yeah.
it completely depicts what he had just talked about as far as feeling like his insides have been completely dug out and there's nothing there.
There's also I feel like there is some gender dynamics at play there.
For sure.
Of like,
yeah,
if your dad is literally Fred Durst, you're probably going to repress your emotions.
Yeah.
or maybe you break stuff.
Yeah.
You could also break stuff.
Yeah, and we've been kind of dancing around spoilers here, but I do think you make a great point. It's worth noting, I guess, without revealing too much, that Owen has been riddled with grief.
Yes.
And that perhaps plays a part of it as well, because when you experience what he does, as we see in those opening scenes, and to your point, his father is maybe not abusive. We don't see any sort of physical abuse on screen.
I'd say that
verbal excuse.
The one scene, the scene that we weren't going into
with the TV at
with
the
the
end?
TV, I'd say that's pretty.
That one is
that's pretty. Like, if not outright abusive, it's. I wouldn't say it's Parent of the Year award.
For sure.
I'm also not a parent, so.
And yeah, no, you're not.
Maybe that's what you do.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I guess I'd really love to see the film again, because my initial interpretation, and I might be completely wrong, I've only seen the film the one time so far, a few days ago. So I'm still processing a lot of what we see here, and a lot of the imagery, especially in the middle of the film, at the end of the film, gets quite transcendental, I guess you could say. Lynchian is, again, to go back to that word. That element of the film did not feel literal to me, and so I'm trying to figure out what the symbolic actions are meant to represent. But there might be a literal component to it. And if that is the case, or maybe even the symbolism of what we see there is absolutely, to your point, that could be part of it as well. I guess I'm still trying to process what that is, because there's the TV element immediately followed by some sort of
like
regurgitation.
Yeah,
and
there's that, and there's also like the little like scribbly lines, which is the coolest detail. But I think I did take that at face value, and
that's fair. And that might have been what it's going for. I've only seen it the one time,
but like face value, but stylized.
Sure.
Like, this isn't Love Lies Bleeding, where how that movie ends is completely symbolic.
Yes. That is, completely fair. So,
my God.
But,
that movie,
but to your point, and now that we're actually talking about it, because this is the first time I've really processed that moment verbally, even in a symbolic context, I think maybe you are getting onto something there, because the way that his father is restraining him, I'll say, it does perhaps indicate something that Owen has experienced in a literal sense, in a real time sense, as far as him trying to literally jump for his identity in some sort of way, only to be held back. And I don't know. There's a lot of layers happening in the moment. It's visually incredible. It's such a great moment in the film.
Like I almost feel like we haven't talked enough about just like the visuals and the craftsmanship, because we mentioned Spielberg earlier, but like, and this is somebody that like actually aspires to be, if not Spielberg, but like aspires to that kind of like director kind of filmmaking.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
There's some other things that I like have in my notes that I like. It's like kind of more like cute stylized moments, like the fact that in the amusement park ride, there's like a ride in the amusement park early on in the film. There is a ride called the Cliffhanger in the background.
Yeah.
And like things like that. There's also in the show, in the theater where Owen works, there's not Transformers, but there's Transmorphers, which is the blockbuster version.
Yeah. And the timing would have been about right.
Yeah.
Because we know that those opening scenes take place in 96. So if you follow the timeline, it's about in line there.
There's all these like little flourishes that are actually like kind of cute and quirky. Like, I was wondering if the Transmorphers thing was a little bit twee, but I also, when I realized what it was and the credits confirmed it, I was so happy, because that's like, I feel like there's a fascination that a lot of trans women have. And this is like, I don't think there's any articles about it or something. Maybe I'll write it. But with like the kind of so bad it's good stuff, with like Mockbusters, The Room, I sometimes wonder if it's like kind of a reflection of just like, okay, here are other people who have all the resources at their disposal and don't know what to do with it, and just like are also failing at being a person in the way that I like. That dysphoria makes you feel like you're like not all there, like your insides are hollowed out. So I think there's something there. I don't know. That's just me spitballing, and that's not something that, you know, is true for all trans people, but it's something that I've definitely noticed.
Yeah, I do really love the craft to this film. It's really immense, and sometimes it is quirky and cute, as you're talking about. Like, I like that moment early on, one of the tracking shots of this film, one of those prolonged moments I mentioned earlier, is when Owen is walking through the high school at the beginning of the film, and you see all of this overlay text and drawings on the screen, which I thought was an interesting touch as well.
That was so, I mean, I talked a lot about like Owen and Maddie's friendship earlier, and that was like, God, that's like so beautiful. It's all, it's also such an iconic, like, this is going to be the kind of thing that like people like rip off when they're making high school movies, like for the rest of time.
Yeah.
I kind of, not to go on too much of a tangent, but I also want to mention the soundtrack excess. Like,
oh my gosh, it's it's so good.
I mentioned Maria BC, but like that Caroline Polachek song is fantastic. Francis Quinlan from Hop Along is in the credits. Like, it's just like the kind of best of indie rock. I would have loved to see more. It's also mastered by a trans guy. We love Emerson Mancini, but anyway, that's me being a music nerd. But I do wish there were more trans women on the soundtrack. Like, I do feel like there are a lot of people, like, you know, your Black Dresses and like even 100 Gex, which I don't want an 100 Gex song anywhere near this movie, but like there are a lot of, like, I feel like that's just like a small missed opportunity. There are some other problems I have with the movie, but I also, that's kind of the thing of like the let's make the greatest movie ever made kind of stuff.
Sure.
I just love that they're going for that, even with the soundtrack.
And I mean, you would certainly know more than me. Would some of that come down to getting the rights for some of those songs? Or maybe it's just the choice that Schoenbrun had for those moments?
I think it was the second one. Okay. Yeah, it's definitely not something I'm like dinging the movie for.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's
No,
just
yeah,
something I wanted to express at some point because it's a little bit weird that this is a movie so about a trans woman experience, and we don't
sure.
really get many, if any. I don't know anything about King women. I don't know if they're trans, but like,
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't. Yeah, I'm not
Sorry,
quite
that's
sure.
me. That's me in the music
No,
mode.
I definitely was curious to hear your thoughts on that. I think the music, broadly speaking, I certainly don't have the level of input you do, but I thought the music was really effective.
Yeah,
Those,
Alex G's awesome.
the score to the film, that scene at the bar, near the third act of the film, I thought was great as well. So like I thought thought it was all very effective, especially the score and how it enhances the tonal precision of this film. And I think the control over that tone is so crucial to what we talked about earlier in terms of that empathy just simmering throughout this entire film, because this is a film that lingers in that pathos for the majority, if not all, of the movie. So it needs to draw you in, and I think the music is very effective in that regard. In addition to those filmmaking tricks and quirks that we were noting earlier, and just to paint a little bit broader as well, I think the 90s aesthetic, the early 2000s aesthetic and ambiance is really great here. I think the film renders that 90s, early 2000s culture extremely well. And I think it gives credence to that aching despondency in Owen that we've been talking about. When it comes to the pink opaque, I know there's been already a ton of references as far as how the film is clearly going for Buffy the Vampire Slayer there. Are You Afraid of the Dark? You do get that late night teen Nick vibe with the show. And I do love how that 90s aesthetic is rendered. It's really fantastic. And I do love
Yeah,
how that's woven in with the rest of the film that still captures not quite the TV 90s aesthetic, but generally that the culture of the 90s really pops in this film. And you couple that with, again, those bright neon hues you get throughout the film, the haziness that comes with the smoke that is often filling these images as well. And I love how that haziness reflects a lot of the symbolism that is attached to these characters in the overall story. It's the craft here is just immaculate.
yeah.
Anything else? What haven't we touched on?
Yeah, I'm looking through my notes again. Um, I don't think I've mentioned. There's one moment that I love the drawing, which is when she draws the pink opaque ghost on
Oh
him.
yeah,
Because that's like, I mean, that's something I go into in my review of like kind of this moment where like she wouldn't do that for like some guy that was trying to get in her pants, especially because she doesn't like eyes. I love the detail that like when they're discussing hot guys, she's like, I like Michael Stipe, which is funny because like Michael Stipe is famously queer. I know. I think he's bi. I don't know how he identifies now, but it's just the funny thing of like landing on that person of all musicians. But yeah, the drawing scene is that made me freeze up, but also just like kind of how like emotional it was.
Mm-hmm.
Like I do think it's a scary movie, but all of that all the sweetness that we've been talking about the entire thing is like what kind of keeps it from like I almost don't think it's a horror movie.
Interesting. Well, I mean that genuinely, I find that fascinating because I did sense those horror tones, and to me, I think I was as I noted earlier, kind of not even kind of, I was quite moved by it because you sense that despondency in Owen throughout a lot of this film. And I know Schoenbrun doesn't see this film as a cautionary tale, and maybe it isn't, but the horror of living out a facade as a shell of yourself, denying your true identity, I think that is incredibly haunting here. And seeing this as a cautionary tale, I do understand why some might feel that way, especially when you get to those final moments. It's as if Owen had lived out most of his life as a spectator and was desperate for some kind of catharsis.
Yeah. There's a reason why, like, towards the end, and I think it's in the trailer too, but like we linger for a while on like the phrase "there is still time."
Yes,
like, I feel like that's Jane extending a hand to the audience.
Oh, for sure.
Of like,
it's not subtle.
Yes, yeah, like that's not really the deepest analysis there, because it's like it's very on the note. But I also love that's like such a
I do too. I love that.
Such a good like mic drop moment of like there's always a way back. Like there's even a way back for Owen, where like it's possible that right as the movie ends, Owen goes to a Planned Parenthood and gets a HRT consultation. Like it's entirely possible that's the next thing that happens.
It's interesting you say that, because I did read an interview where she was asked about doing a sequel to this. I don't know if you read that or not.
Oh my God, why would somebody? That's such a Marvel brained question. I'm sorry, I hate that.
You're not wrong, but she gave a genuine answer to it, and that they felt like it would be an interesting exploration of what happens to Owen next after this. And I think you articulated it actually quite well early on in this conversation, where you said this is the movie before you get to the movie, traditionally speaking. Not that she would follow this with some sort of traditional trans experience or trans movie, but now that we're at the point where maybe Owen can find, something within himself to make that transition. I don't know, but she did speak to how there is something there that she would genuinely be interested in exploring. I don't think that it'll happen. Like I don't think we'll ever see that. But I thought it was an interesting.
I wouldn't be mad if there was like, maybe there's like a short film, or like there is something more in that world. Like if this was like the early 2000s, where like DVD extras were all the rage, like we would probably see a full episode of The Pink Opaque.
Oh my gosh, yes. Make that on Netflix tomorrow, please.
Yeah. And if it was like a really big hit, we would see both like the kind of Pink Opaque, how Owen remembers it, and then Pink Opaque as it actually is.
Yes. Yes.
Which is so I'm still like
that
this movie is funny.
It is, and honestly, that was one of my biggest takeaways with this film, and perhaps why I just completely found myself heartbroken for Owen. I mean, not only is he living out this facade, but as it relates back to what we were talking about earlier with art, how we see or how it helps us inform our identities, but nostalgia has these blinders that have a way of either keeping us myopically attached to that art in a way that is still true, or perhaps there's the other side of that coin where it can maybe be misguided, perhaps. I'm not sure what the right word is there, but there's that duality in the film is incredible, because a lot of, and I kind of joked about it earlier as far as watching films I grew up with, and do I even want to go back and revisit them, because a lot of the times they don't hold up, but it doesn't make our experiences with those movies, TV shows, music, whatever the art is, it doesn't make it any less true or real. And The Pink Opaque, as we come to see, it really isn't quite as it's depicted to be early on in the film, but Owen did find real meaning in it. Is it embarrassing to see it through a different perspective as you get older? Maybe. I'm sure a lot of us have had those experiences, but that was his experience though. And it really did change and inform him in many respects, but it all at the same time it kept him from, I don't know, embracing who he actually is. I mean, there's a lot more to it than just a peak opaque, but I don't know. That polarity, I think, is quite mesmerizing here, though.
Yeah, I'm looking through if there's anything else that we haven't covered. Because I think I covered the cliffhanger thing, which is one of those things that I knew I had to bring up because it's so good.
Can I ask you this question? So,
sure.
The film opens with election night in 1996. Do you think that? I mean, I don't want to phrase it as if the film did this accidentally. There was clearly some sort of purposeful choice to it. But like, I'm wondering what your interpretation of that is. Why the film chooses election night 1996 as the setting in which begins this film and the motion of events here. Is there any lingering subtext there, perhaps, or something culturally to infuse these characters?
I don't know. Yeah, I have no idea because I mean I'm a '97 baby, so so like I wasn't there. I didn't exist.
Yeah, but, which is fair. I just was curious.
I will no, but I also I'm pretty sure that she even that Brenda says something to Owen that's like it's time to be a man and make a very important decision, and then the next shot is like him slowly dragging his hand across the ballot. I think it's a funny, like, I think it's like kind of a like, it might even just be meant to be a little bit funny because it is like,
and maybe that's all it is. I could be
but it's also
that's not
in a movie that's this dense. I feel like there's probably some meaning. There's. Yeah, and I also think that the point of the scene is like the kind of saying like, oh, you have to make a decision, and then it's almost like and then it's like one vote in one town. I don't know, but I feel like there is something there. But yeah, I'm not quite sure why it opens that way. The other thing that I want to
go ahead.
I'm still not quite sure if it works is the narration.
Like the breaking of the fourth wall?
I actually don't like a lot of it. That's like the one outright critique I still have of the movie, because like I didn't like the ending at first, the first time I saw it. When I saw it again, it made sense. I was like, this is basically the only way the movie could have ended. And when I feel like so much of the movie is like, I mean, a lot of it is very in your face, but a lot of it is very subtle too. Like the nuances are communicated more subtly. And I feel like there's a lot of stuff where we didn't need the narration, even if that's the point where, and like, I'm pretty sure Maddie even says something of like feeling like you're narrating your own life.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a meta thing.
It is. Yeah.
It's kind of like because I mean, of course it's a meta thing, but like, it's kind of like a rare meta moment that kind of leans on the fourth wall outside of the narration. Leaning without breaking. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's very fair. I don't know if it bothered me too much, but I do very much empathize with that. I don't know if the film needed it. I'd like to give it another watch, and I certainly will. I love the film. I can't wait to watch it again, because there's a lot I really want to focus on a rewatch to help our find more meaning or more ways to articulate why I loved it. But I found, maybe if I found the narration interesting here, is because I don't know if Owen is a reliable one, and I think perhaps there's maybe not contradiction, but I think there's it might enhance or perhaps complement the choices we see in the character versus what he is telling us through some of that breaking of the fourth wall.
Towards the end, I think it really like some of the line deliveries. There's also one where like I think I don't know if we mentioned like the flat screen TV.
No,
Yeah.
not yet. Yeah.
But like there's one where like he's kind of clearly mugging for the camera, and it's really funny. Of like he's just really trying to be like, you know, I love this more than anything.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
no, and I think it's worth it for that moment, and also just a line delivery that I can't spoil, but yeah, no, I can't spoil it. This movie is so hard to talk about.
I know.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, I think the pacing is almost a little bit too rushed. Like, but I also could have like the movie could have gone on for another hour, and I would have been happy with it.
I hear you. Yeah, totally agree. I don't know if we're thinking of the same line, but there is a moment through one of those, you know, moments of narration that you're talking about where, again, I'll be vague to dance around spoilers here, but he talks about making choices. I've decided that I need to draw a line in the sand. I'm going to make choices and become a member of society.
Right.
And what's interesting about that, especially given how it implies that other people become involved in his life, but we don't see that.
Yeah.
The film very intentionally hides that from us. So we don't really know if any of what he's saying there is true.
Oh my God.
Especially given what follows in the next scene, which is him at work. You know, he's older. He has the moment in the bathroom. And I like that contradiction to me is just hypnotizing. Heartbreaking still. Like
Wow,
it adds to the pathos of
I
the
didn't
film.
even consider that it might be unreliable. I think like I thought if there was any tension, it came from like how unhappy he clearly was, and I think we are thinking of different lines. It's when he goes like, "I never saw this character again."
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
That
moment too.
which is, I think, the best line delivery outside of the monologue, or
Yeah.
even including the monologue. I think it's definitely Justice Smith's best
Yeah.
delivery in the whole film. Like, yeah, that's really stuck with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm so anxious to see this film again. Like I'm desperate to see it again because because that moment, I completely agree. It's great. It comes off the heels of the monologue. There's a moment on a football field, and I wonder if the film is toying more with, and this circles back to something we talked about earlier with his father and the TV moment, and how maybe I didn't take that literally. Maybe I should have, because I think there's an argument to be made about that whole sequence, the monologue, the football field sequence. Is any of that literal? Is it something that's psychologically driven? Is it, a remnant of his emotional isolation and detachment? Is it something that he's conjuring as a coping mechanism? I think there's an argument to be made that all of that's where that's born out of. Or maybe there is a literal aspect to it. I don't know, but that's why I really want to see the film again, because the way he delivers that line, I think you could at least read it that way. And because once he says that line, that's kind of when we transition to, I'm making choices. I'm becoming part of society. And it's like there's some interesting ambiguity there.
God, this movie is so painful. It's sweet, and it's like, I sold it to a friend by saying like, because they were like concerned about seeing it, and I sold it by being like, it's kind of the same tone as Past Lives if Cronenberg directed it.
That's a really fascinating comparison.
I'm like,
that's really good.
I'm like, because they're one of my closest friends, and I I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but they were like, you have to see Past Lives, will wreck you, but you have to see it. And that's how that's basically what I said to them about TV Glow of like, this will wreck you. This will make you feel a lot of things about gender and everything else.
Yeah.
And like emotional repression, but like you got to see it. And I mean, that's kind of, if there's one takeaway from the movie is that like, you can't run away from your feelings forever. Is that it's going to find you, it's going to catch up to you, you're going to lose your shit in the middle of that out.
Yeah.
That's a spoiler.
Yeah. That's okay. I can bleep you out. No worries. We're good.
Yeah. But yeah. God, I saw it twice and I want to see it a third time. I'm ready
to see it again. Yeah.
Group chat with other trans women that just exclusively talks, like it's called the Pinko Fake fan club. Nice. Where it's just we just exclusively talk about the movie, and there's like the whole thing is like spoilers for season 6 episode 1.
Yeah.
And which is so I wish I came up with that name, but yeah, it's people that, because it's part of a larger channel with a movie channel that like it was hogging up with so many spoilers that it's like, why don't we just create a separate one? And it's just all trans women that have seen it like 5 or 6 times, which is where I was going with all that. Nice. And I'm excited to see it. If you were like, it's gonna rip my heart out. There's that phrase again. But like, I'm excited to see it and just to see more people's reactions to it.
Yeah, and that's so fascinating that you guys, you do have a connection to it, and that is personal, and it rips your heart out. And isn't that the duality of the movie? Like, that is the core of everything that we see here. So it's certainly transferred to even you guys in a real life setting, which is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we're not to clarify, we're not talking about the movie like, or we're not talking about the Pinko Pig like it's a real show.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's like we're just talking about the movie and just kind of going over every detail, which is ironically similar to how, like, you know, message boards for Buffy and Pinko Pig and Supernatural, even in the 2010s, all were. And it is a little bit funny that, I mean, that's something that you, if you don't mind me just quoting something from my review, not directly, but something I say is that, like, I hope that this movie becomes as dated as Pinko Pig eventually becomes to Owen, where I hope that there are so many trans stories that this is just kind of seen as like an early one that's like kind of a mundane story, because I feel like there's so much potential for trans stories, and this is the thing that kicked the door open, because I think it's not like People's Joker. I kind of joke that it's like it's like the best video essay ever, but it's like only kind of like a pretty good movie. And not to pit trans people against each other, but like this is somebody going for it. And and
that's a really poignant perspective, and one that I find really fascinating. And I hope you're right. Really, like, it's interesting because I think this is the best film of the year so far. It's likely going to end up on a lot of top 10 lists at the end of the year. And there is an irony that, in another 20, 30 years, we do look back at it as, oh man, isn't that outdated?
I mean, that's me being an optimist, because I know the way that this is coming out, and this is something else was in the review, during like a really bad time for trans people. And it's like, this is almost what, like, this movie exists almost like, these are the kinds of great movies out and great stories and art that we're going to be losing out on if you force people back into the closet and like to live out their lives like Owen. And it's like, which is why it's like a very bittersweet movie in that sense. It's like, I really hope that trans rights trans people get so accepted that we get like, you know, a crazy Love Lies Bleeding thing. Because I feel like Schoenbrun has it in them to do something.
I agree.
Because I mean, Love Lies Bleeding is my number 2 Hundreds of Beavers is number 3. This is a crazy year for movies.
It is, for sure. No, and yeah, I think you make a really great point, and yeah, no, I do hope that we get to a point where we get more stories that can make this look, I don't know if tame is the right word, but certainly outdated. And I do kind of wonder, again, going back to this being set in the mid 90s and early 2000s, where culturally, is it a whole lot different than it is now? I
Yes.
don't know. Yes. Okay. And I do think that comes through in the film. So you think of the moment when he walks in on his manager and he's in there with a woman, and he, like, this manager character teases him about it, like, don't you want a part of the action? Like, he's trying to pry something out of Owen there. There's the moments with his father, as we talked about earlier. And I think that's why calling this film Lynchian, like, I feel like as critics, sometimes we get caught up in the traps of a film has these Lynchian visual qualities, and it's easy to throw that term out there. This, I feel like, is truly Lynchian in the sense that David Lynch, with 1950s films or in the 60s, like the way he could examine small town Americana, repressed horror, the suburban mundanity, he was impeccable at examining that. And that's exactly what this film is doing. Like, even if you remove the stylistic choices, that's a lot of this film is that repressed horror. It's the suburban mundanity.
Yeah.
It's small town Americana. And then you couple that with the actual filmmaking choices. And this is a truly inspired Lynchian effort that is, that gives credence to that description. And so, like, I think all of that comes through in this fascinating way that, for this time and where we're at now, perhaps this is a film that is really desperately needed, and people seem to be responding to it. But what you're talking about there, I hadn't really even considered, and I think you make a great point. I think it's fascinating.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
on top of that, like, I feel like, because Lynch is obviously a comparison. Like, Charlie Kaufman is another touchstone that people,
sure.
Which makes me really happy, because, like, that people say that, because Kaufman obviously has a lot of trans themes, and, like, being John Malkovich.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I don't even need to, like, just conceptually, the fact that you're going into another body.
Yeah.
And, like, I feel like it takes all these influences, but it isn't, like, beholden to them, because I feel like it's easy to kind of be like, to evoke Lynch, evoke all these directors, well, evoke Spielberg, because that's what, like, so many movies have tried to do, of like 80s nostalgia. But I think what Schoenbrun does is actually build on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, it's not a movie that is beholden to nostalgia. It actually kind of, because it's a movie about not being beholden to nostalgia, it actually, like, kind of walks the walk, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the real deal, and I'm so glad that we have it.
I am as well. As I noted earlier, I can't wait to see this film again. It's allegories, at least at times, it might be obvious, but I think there's such a deep poignancy to it that it will rip your heart out in all of the best ways. There is a power to this film that's fantastic. The performances are really great. I mean, I cannot echo enough Justice Smith and how great he is here. I mean, this is a film that also has Fred Durst, and he's actually good, like, in a small role, but, like, it's effective. Like,
I, like, did
wild.
not. It's so funny. I did not think that, like, Fred Durst would even like trans people.
Yeah, that's
like, what is going on?
You would not make that connection at all.
But
Like,
it's yeah, and it's like
crazy.
literally him sounding. It is him like being aware of his own image when like it's funny
Yeah.
because like Limp Bizkit is so famously like the least self-aware band in
Yeah.
history. I mean, maybe Wes Borland or whatever his name is self-aware, but like Fred Durst is the least self-aware person ever.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just wild. I cannot recommend the film enough. It's
Yeah.
fantastic. Hannah, thanks so much for being here. This was a pleasure. I loved having this conversation with you.
And thank you for having me on. No, this was awesome. I loved getting to talk about this movie because
Yeah.
there's so much to talk about.
And there is, absolutely. Tell us about your work, and once again, where can we find your writings on this film?
So I primarily do a lot of music writing. So I send the intro I write for like, Pitchfork and Billboard, them, Grammy.com. I think some other. I don't even think I got all of them. But I also run a newsletter where I publish this review.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called Transient Peak. Trans. I'm not much like this movie. I'm not particularly subtle about the transness. Like I think there's a series that's extremely. If you are an audio and music nerd like I am, like I, not to do my own horn about, like I really think that like there's a lot of really cool stuff that I'm doing, and I'm talking to a lot of queer musicians. And the kind of thing is, yeah, I'm talking to exclusively queer musicians, but it's about everything about their queerness, because I feel like that is part of it, but there's so much more. And yeah, I've also branched out into film because I saw this and I knew I had to write, 1,500 words about it. And in addition to that, I make music under the stage name The Answers in Between, and I'm also an audio and mixing engineer and a mastering engineer for a lot of musicians in the New York City area. And there's I wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
And it's cool that I kind of
yeah.
I also have a letterbox, obviously.
Yeah.
And that's Hannah Jocelyn C, which is also my name on Twitter and Instagram. I'm locked right now because Billie Eilish stans are probably currently swarming me. Because I just reviewed that for Pitchfork. But once I'm unlocked, feel free to follow me and keep up with my antics. Yeah, this is awesome. I'm so glad I got to do this, and I'm so glad that I got to be like film critic Hannah, because there's so much. There's like I do love movies. I think Fableman's actually was the reason I kind of started being like, wait, do I actually want to like properly get into movies? And like, yeah. Now I'm here. Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much for seeing this and like inviting me on.
Absolutely.
I love
it to hear your perspective. It was
Thank you.
really compelling to hear. You made some great points I didn't even really think about all too much. And yeah, it was great to get your voice on here and to really hear how this film moved you. And I can't recommend Hannah's piece enough. And as you were talking about there, you do a lot of music stuff. So if you're into music, please go and check out Hannah's work at all those various platforms that was noted there. So again, thank you for being here. Just a quick plug for the main show this week. We are continuing our Best Picture movie series as we talk about Casablanca, the small film Casablanca. So that'll be coming out soon. Be on the lookout for that. Of course, we would love to know your guys' thoughts on this film. So if you've seen it, please reach out to us. You can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube, or you can simply reach out to us on social media if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. However you are joining us here, we really do appreciate it. Hannah, before we get out of here, do you have any final thoughts on anything before we leave?
I mean, I think we've covered everything. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you being here. This was a blast. I can't wait to see this again. Really cannot wait to see it again. And we kind of joked about it a little bit about how this film isn't all that subtle. But again, it's a film that is really aiming for this emotional backbone. So I kind of don't mind that at times.
Yes.
It's not as subtle. At times, though, it's also just kind of weird and outlandish in ways that isn't going to be as cogent as some of the symbolism might be. Either way, regardless of where you find yourself on that spectrum, I think that's why I love that last shot of the film and the chalk outline there. It's just, I think this is a film that doesn't need to be subtle in its messaging there. And I think it ends in this really great way. It's going to be hard to top that as one of the best endings of the year, as far as I'm concerned. Good stuff. I love the film. Be sure to reach out to us. Again, thanks, Hannah, for being here. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast.